With Pokemon Scarlet and Violet coming out, I wanted to do a brief video on how I, as a competitive Pokemon VGC player, approach playing these games. Might be a little bit different from how players who don't compete in VGC tournaments or players who just like to collect Pokemon or like the, casual in-game experience might approach the game. So yeah, I think this would be a fun video. Hopefully this is something that you all find interesting. And let us know what kind of content you want to see here at Beastcoast Pokemon. We have a lot of big plans for Gen 9, and so feel free to leave any suggestions. And yeah, let's just dive right into things. Hey guys, Cybertron. Relax, I was just gonna get there. Anyway, as this little buddy was saying, 80% of you aren't subscribed to the channel, so hit that subscribe button. It really helps. Hey, what Pokemon are you? Now, naturally, the first thing to talk about with something like this is the starter choice. Funnily enough, I normally don't really pick my starter based off competitive viability. I have not spoiled myself actually on what the future evolutions look like either. I just picked the one that I think generally looks cool or cute. I've always had a very strong affinity for water-type Pokemon in particular, and so part of the reason for that is because Gen 3 and Gen 4 were actually my first two generations. I started with Mudkip in Gen 3 and then Piplup in Gen 4. Piplup is my all-time favorite starter, and maybe just overall Pokemon. It's just so cute, and so I am leaning towards Quaxly for this upcoming game. After that, I think, when I approach the in-game experience, it's definitely more focused on understanding the new competitive landscape, and what I mean by that is hyper-focusing on using new moves within in-game or catching new Pokemon as well. And especially for Scarlet and Violet, right? Like in the first few weeks, I just want to understand what all the new Pokemon do. I want to know what their abilities are. And so I think my in-game experience will very much be driven by new Pokemon rather than returning Pokemon. And part of the reason for that is because I just know the stats of the old Pokemon. I generally know what they do. Obviously, some will have been nerfed and others will have gotten buffs in terms of movesets or stats or whatnot. But the in-game experience, because I know that I need to learn these new Pokemon as quickly as possible, and I want to learn them as quickly as possible, I'll generally catch my team in game and focus on entirely new Pokemon. And obviously what you end up doing in game doesn't necessarily translate to how you'll use them competitively, but just to start getting into the rhythm of, oh, this is its typing, this is its ability, this is how I can potentially use it competitively. It starts, just, teaching me things about it. And so that, I generally like to focus more on new Pokemon and not focus as much on old Pokemon. I will say also, as I go through the in-game experience, it's very much how can I learn as much as possible about these brand new games, and so utilizing new moves, utilizing new items as well. It's interesting as a competitive player, I feel like when I first picked up Pokemon, Pokemon was literally one of my first video games and franchises in general, so there's definitely a lot of magic to it, right? Even just the in-game experience through the story, for example, and just the whole player experience. I think as I got older and played different video games, for example, I realized, oh, I really like narrative-driven and story-based games, and Pokemon has cool stories, but I feel like generally compared to a lot of games that really are driven by narrative and story, they maybe aren't as strong in that regard, at least for me personally. And so as a result, I feel like in more recent years, I've really actually rushed through the story. With Scarlet and Violet, I think because it is kind of a different formula and different take on the franchise in general, I want to slow things down a little bit and really understand it. But that being said, yeah, I think especially with Sun and Moon and even Sword and Shield to an extent, I couldn't tell you very much about the story because I was like, okay, I'm just trying to beat the game, get to a point where I can start getting competitive teams in game. But I think with Scarlet and Violet, I definitely want to re-explore some of that old love and take some more time with the in-game experience. What can I do in-game that allows me to get competitive teams as quickly as possible? Because obviously when we start out, it's going to be hard to put together teams. So I'm like, okay, let me get the resources as quickly as possible so I can start grinding out and start, breeding teams and putting strategies together. And so I think, Sword and Shield was really awesome because of raids. That was easily one of my favorite parts of Gen 8. And me and my friends just did so many raids in the opening weeks of the game. And it was such a fun experience, and I was like, this is awesome because we're getting a lot of actually value out of doing these. We're catching Pokemon that we can actually use competitively. We get to do it together. I think that's one of my favorite things. And, actually when I was a kid, me and my friends would literally spend our summer breaks in my bedroom AC blasting, and we would all just have our Game Boys out together and play through it together. And so raids very much reminded me of that core memory of when I was younger, which I think is awesome. And so similarly with Scarlet and Violet, there's obviously a fair amount of co-op play, and so I'm eager to do that, especially in regards to starting to get competitive teams and Pokemon in game. I think understanding the core mechanic is also going to be big. I generally feel like throughout the last couple of generations, for example, Dynamax and Sword and Shield, I don't feel like I learned very much about, oh, how can I use this competitively through the in-game experience, but terrestrializing in general is such a unique mechanic. It's something that I've thought about a lot in theory, but to me, I'm like, I can theory all I want, but until I get the game in hand and actually get the experience, I don't think I'll understand it super well. So whatever amount of terrestrializing exists in the core game, even if it is something very simple, I think just seeing it come out, seeing it like in person and in my eyes will already help me understand it a little bit better. And so I think, you know, the core to winning competitive VGC is definitely, one of the cores, I should say, is mastery of the mechanic of that generation. And so if you're able to use Dynamax really well in Sword and Shield, for example, that would give you a really big advantage. Similarly, understanding how you can use terrestrializing, whether it be in you know, an offensive or defensive kind of capability is really important. And so, yeah, I don't know how it's going to be incorporated in the end game. Once again, I've actually stayed away from all spoilers, haven't looked at any of the leaks, and that's because I just like to have a fresh experience going into a new generation and a new game. Generally, I try to beat the games as quickly as possible because my goal really is to get teams together as quickly as possible. And, you know, the sooner you get towards the end of the game, the more resources you have available to you. And so I don't know what it's going to look like for Scarlet and Violet, but, you know, I'm thinking of Sword and Shield and how after you beat the game, you're able to, you know, go to the battle towers, start accumulating battle points to get nature mints, for example, or vitamins even to an extent. And so also one thing that I often try to do in the end game is, you know, just grind out points, whether it be like battle points or grind out battles, so that I have a lot of money to purchase vitamins with. For Scarlet and Violet in particular, like my goal is to just get a cool competitive team within the game in the first couple of days. And I would say actually that's one of my priorities, especially as like a content creator here. I want to just start pushing out battles and get experience hands-on immediately. Now, part of it, the thing that makes this interesting is, you know, number one, the ladder actually doesn't go into effect for competitive battles until December 1st. So we actually have a couple of days, or, you know, let's say 2 weeks-ish or so before you can start battling others on the ladder. The goal when the ladder rolls around ideally is to have multiple teams and strategies, especially built around new Pokemon. So that's kind of what I'm going in with the focus of. And the second is also, you do have to wait for other people to build, you know, competitive teams as well, because if you are the first one to build a competitive team but everyone else is using their in-game team, obviously that doesn't make for very exciting battles or content. That's generally how I approach the games. I think for me, you know, I talked about how I didn't like story or Pokemon narrative has been maybe a little bit less appealing. I will say I always love hearing what music exists in new Pokemon games. I just have so many good memories with Pokemon music in general. I feel like it's really defined a lot of my playing experience. And so, yeah, I love just hearing whatever new soundtracks exist and whatever new songs are in the game. As a competitive player, I probably play through the game at a little faster rate, although for Scarlet and Violet, not Sword and Shield, I want to slow things down a little bit because it does seem, you know, like it's deviating quite a bit from previous generations. But the main goal is to learn new Pokemon and new moves as quickly as possible, new items as well, I should say, and get together a awesome team as quickly as possible. Let us know how you approach the in-game experience for a brand new generation. And yeah, thank you so much for watching.